The rain didn't stop for 3 days after they buried him. Elena stood at the kitchen sink of the apartment they had shared for 16 years, holding a coffee mug that still had his lip print on the rim. She hadn't washed it. She couldn't. That faint, ghostly crescent was the last physical trace of Daniel's mouth on this earth, and scrubbing it away felt like burying him a second time. She was 43 years old. She had a savings account, a dead husband, and a silence so enormous it seemed to have weight, pressing down on her shoulders until her knees buckled and she slid to the tile floor. She didn't cry. She had run out of tears somewhere between the hospital and the funeral home. What she had instead was a low, animal hum in her chest, a sound that meant I am still alive and I don't know why. On the counter, a letter sat unopened. It had arrived the morning of the funeral, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize, postmarked from a village she had never heard of, Valsal. Inside, 3 lines: "Your husband inherited a house here. We have been waiting. Come when you are ready. M." She stared at it for a long time. Then she packed a single suitcase. The weeks before she left the city were the cruelest of her life. Grief, she discovered, was not a single emotion. It was a landlord who moved into your body and rearranged the furniture. She would forget Daniel was gone for 30 seconds at a time, reach for her phone to text him something funny, turn to ask him where the scissors were, and then remember. And each remembering was a small death, and there were hundreds of them each day. Friends came. Then they stopped coming. Not out of cruelty, but because grief is contagious and people have their own lives. Her sister called every Sunday at 11 a.m. And Elena learned to say, "I'm doing better," in a voice that sounded almost human. Her sister, relieved, would talk about her children, and Elena would stare at a crack in the ceiling and count the seconds. Money was the next wound. Daniel had been the accountant of their marriage, the one who knew where everything was. When Elena finally opened the drawer with the bills, she found notices she didn't understand, a second mortgage she hadn't known about. Medical debt from the cancer treatments that insurance had fought her on. The apartment she thought was theirs was leveraged to the ceiling. In 6 months, she would have nothing. She sat at the kitchen table one night and tried to feel panic, but panic required a future, and she didn't have one of those anymore. That was when she picked up the letter again. Valsal. A name she whispered out loud. It sounded like wind moving through tall grass. The letter said Daniel had inherited a house. But Daniel had never mentioned any inheritance. Daniel's parents were from a different country entirely. He had no relatives she hadn't met at their wedding. And yet, when she searched the deed records online, the house was real. A stone cottage at the edge of a village in the Carpathian foothills. Registered in Daniel's grandfather's name. Transferred, upon Daniel's death, to her. She booked a one-way ticket that night. The clerk at the airline asked when she planned to return. "I don't," she said, and was surprised by how calm her voice was. The taxi from the nearest town refused to take her all the way in. "Valsal?" The driver squinted at her in the rear-view mirror. "I take you to the bridge." "Not past." "Not a good place for driving." She thought he meant the roads. She was wrong. She walked the last 2 kilometers with her suitcase rolling behind her on a packed dirt path, past fields gone gold with late autumn. Past apple trees so heavy with fruit that the branches touched the ground. The village, when she came to it, was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. 30 or 40 houses with sagging wooden roofs, a church with a tin spire, chickens in the road, and an old woman in a black headscarf sitting on a bench who watched Elena approach without surprise. As if she had been expected for a very long time. "Maria?" Elena asked, holding up the letter. The old woman nodded. "You are Daniel's woman. Come. The house is ready." Elena wanted to ask 100 questions. How did you know Daniel? Why didn't he ever tell me about this place? Who are you? But Maria had already risen and was walking, and Elena found herself following, her suitcase catching on every stone. The cottage was at the far end of the village, past a small graveyard with leaning wooden crosses. It was smaller than she had imagined and older. Walls of white stone. A blue door. A garden overgrown with what she later learned were medicinal herbs: yarrow, chamomile, wormwood, rue. Inside, one room with a wood stove, a bed under the window, a table with 2 chairs, and, on the wall, a photograph she had never seen before. A man who looked exactly like Daniel, but wasn't Daniel. The clothes were from another century. His grandfather, Maria said, watching her face. André. Same face. Same eyes. Your husband never came here, yes? He did not know. Know what? Maria didn't answer. She placed a key in Elena's palm and closed her fingers around it. The village will feed you for 1 week. After that, you must decide. Some stay. Some leave. The ones who leave, she paused, searching for the word in a language that wasn't hers, they do not come back the same. That should have been a warning. Elena would think about that sentence for the rest of her life. But at that moment, she was simply exhausted, and the bed under the window looked soft, and she had nowhere else in the world to go. She slept for 14 hours. She dreamed of Daniel the entire time, and when she woke, her pillow was wet, and outside her window, a small brown bird was watching her through the glass with an intelligence that did not belong to a bird. Something was off about Valsel. It took Elena a week to articulate it, and even then, only to herself. The village was beautiful. The people were kind, if quiet. They brought her bread and cheese and a jar of honey so dark it looked like molten amber. An old man named Petru fixed her stove without being asked. A woman named Anna taught her how to build a fire that would last the night. But there were no children. Not one. In a village of perhaps 80 souls, there wasn't a single child, no school, no swing set, no small shoes by any doorway. When she finally asked Anna about it, the woman's face tightened, and she said only, "The young ones go to the city. They do not return." There were other things. The church had no priest. The cemetery had graves from the 1800s and graves from last year, but almost nothing in between, as if an entire generation had been skipped. The forest that bordered the village on 3 sides was deeply, unnaturally quiet. No birdsong passed the tree line. No deer. Once, walking to gather firewood, Elena had felt the distinct, unmistakable sensation of being watched, and had turned to find nothing but ferns moving in a wind she could not feel. She tried to leave, twice. The first time, she made it to the bridge before a panic attack so violent doubled her over, her lungs refusing to fill, her vision narrowing to a pinprick. She crawled back to the cottage and slept for a day. The second time, she packed her suitcase and walked out the blue door, and forgot, halfway down the path, where she had been going. She stood in the road for 10 minutes holding her suitcase, and then, embarrassed for reasons she couldn't name, went back inside. Grief, she told herself. Grief does strange things. She began to work the garden because working the garden was the only thing that quieted the noise in her head. Maria taught her the names of plants. Which ones for tea? Which ones for wounds? Which ones to never, ever touch with bare hands? Elena learned that yarrow stopped bleeding and that rue, in small doses, eased a broken heart, and that the small brown bird that watched her every morning was called a privigator, and it was said in the old stories, to carry the voices of the dead. She started talking to Daniel in the garden. Full conversations. Telling him about her day, about the soup she had made, about the way the light fell on the mountains in the late afternoon. She knew she was going a little mad. She didn't care. Madness was warmer than the silence of the apartment in the city. One night she found Daniel's grandfather's journal in a loose floorboard under the bed. She almost didn't open it. Some part of her, some old animal part, knew that opening it would change everything. But she had come too far, and lost too much, and her curiosity had sharpened into something like hunger. She lit the oil lamp and began to read. The handwriting was her husband's. Exactly. Down to the loop on the lowercase g. The journal was dated 1923. André, Daniel's grandfather, had written about Valsel the way a man writes about a lover he cannot leave. The village chooses, he wrote. It does not let the wrong ones stay. And it does not let the right ones go easily. I have been here 6 years. My wife in Brasov thinks I am dead. Perhaps I am. Elena read all night. By sunrise, she understood 3 things. First, Daniel's grandfather had not died in the war, as the family story went. He had come here, to this village, as a young man, and never left. He had written for 40 years in this journal. He had tended this same garden. He had known Maria, who in the journal was already an old woman in 1947. Which was impossible. Second, there was something in the mountains behind Valsel. André never named it directly. He called it the old thing, and the listener, and once, terribly, the one who keeps us. He wrote that it fed on grief, not in the way a monster feeds, but the way soil feeds a tree. It drew grieving people toward the village. It let them stay as long as they carried their pain. And when they put the pain down, it let them go. Third, and this was the line that made Elena set the journal down and press both hands flat against the table to stop them from shaking, my grandson will come here one day, if I am lucky. Or his wife, if I am not. The pain runs in the blood. The village will feed on her until she is empty. And then she will be free. Elena did not sleep for 2 days. She walked. She walked every path around the village, every trail into the foothills, and she felt it now, the watching, not malevolent but patient, the way a cat watches a bird it has no intention of catching. She walked to the bridge, and this time the panic didn't come, because she wasn't trying to leave. She was trying to understand. On the 3rd night, she sat with Maria in the old woman's kitchen and asked her directly. How long have you been here? Maria stirred her tea. Long. How long, Maria? The old woman looked up, and in her eyes Elena saw something she had not let herself see before, a tiredness so deep it had become a kind of stone. I came when my son died, Maria said. In the First War. I was 32. Does that answer your question? Elena did the math. Her hands went cold. Are we? No, Maria said gently. We are not dead. We are not ghosts. The village is real. The ground is real. The bread is real. But time here is slower. It stretches around grief. It holds us while we heal. That is its gift and its price. Some heal in a year. Some take 50. André took 46. When he was empty of his sorrow, the village let him go, and he was an old man, and he went home to a son who did not know him, and he died in a week of an ordinary heart attack. That is the way of it. Elena sat very still. And if I never empty? Maria smiled, and it was the saddest smile Elena had ever seen. Then you will be the next me. Elena made her choice slowly, over a long winter. She did not try to leave again. Not because she couldn't. Now that she understood the nature of the place, she suspected she could walk out any morning she was ready, but because she wasn't ready. And she had stopped pretending that she was. Instead, she began to work. She worked the garden until her hands cracked and bled, and she learned which salve to rub into them at night. She learned to milk a goat from Anna, learned to bake bread in the stone oven behind the house, learned the old songs the women sang while they pickled cabbage in the autumn. She learned how to split wood in a way that did not destroy her shoulder, and how to read the sky for weather, and how to sit with an old person who was dying, because in a village without children, people still died, and someone had to hold their hand. She sat with a woman named Teodora for 3 nights at the end. Teodora had come to Valsal in 1961 after her husband was taken by the regime. She had been waiting, she said, for 64 years, to stop being angry. On the 3rd night, something in her face softened, and she said, "Oh. Oh, there you are," to someone Elena could not see, and then she was gone. The village buried her the next day, and Elena wept, not for Teodora, but for Daniel, for the first time cleanly, without the rage underneath. The weeping felt like a boil lancing. She was lighter afterward, and frightened by the lightness, and she understood, dimly, that this was how it worked. Grief was not a thing you got rid of. It was a thing you metabolized, slowly, by giving it to the work of living. Spring came. Then summer. Then another winter. She did not count the years after the second one. Time in Valsal was a river, not a clock. She knew she was aging more slowly here, her reflection in the well water barely changed, but she also knew that this was not immortality. It was a pause. A held breath. The village was letting her heal at the pace she needed to heal. She began to talk to the small brown bird. The privigator. It came to her windowsill every morning, and she put crumbs there, and one day, without planning it, she said, "Hello, Daniel." The bird tilted its head. It did not fly away. She never knew, after that, whether the bird was really him, or whether she had finally accepted that she would never know, and both of those things felt, somehow, the same. Her hands grew strong. Her face grew weathered. Her laugh came back, startled her one afternoon when Petru fell off a ladder and landed in a pile of hay, and she heard herself laughing, helping him up and still laughing. And Petru laughed too, and it was the first time she had laughed since Daniel's diagnosis, 3 years and a lifetime ago. She was healing. She felt it, and it terrified her. Because healing meant the village would let her go. The day she understood what Valsal truly was, she was kneeling in the garden, pulling autumn weeds. A woman was walking up the path. Young, perhaps 30. A city coat. A suitcase with a broken wheel. Her face had the particular emptiness that Elena recognized instantly, because she had worn it herself, on the day she arrived, however many years ago that had been. The woman stopped at the gate. "I'm looking for a house," the woman said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in days. "My mother died. She left me a letter. She said there was a cottage." Elena stood. She brushed dirt from her knees. Her hands, she noticed, were an old woman's hands now, knobbed at the knuckles, brown from the sun. She looked at the young woman, at her eyes, at the raw open wound of her. And she understood. Valsal did not just hold the grieving. It was made of them. Every person who came here empty and left whole, they left something behind. A trace. A seed. The village lived on those traces. And when a new grief came walking up the path, a guide was chosen to meet it, someone who had just recently learned the shape of the loss. Someone close enough to remember the pain but far enough to have survived it. Maria had chosen her. And now it was her turn to choose. She had 2 options. She could turn away. Let the woman pass. Let her find the cottage empty, let her figure it out alone as Elena had. Elena herself could walk to the bridge that very evening and find, this time, that nothing stopped her. She could go home, to a city that had long since forgotten her, to a sister who might not recognize her, to a life that had moved on without her permission. She could be free. Or she could stay. A little longer. One more winter. One more grief that was not her own, but that she could walk beside, the way Maria had walked beside her. She thought about Daniel. about what he would have wanted. And she realized, with a sudden piercing clarity, that this was why his grandfather had written that journal and hidden it under the floorboards. Not as a warning. As an inheritance. A chain of hands reaching across a century. The pain runs in the blood, André had written. But so did the healing. So did the holding. She opened the gate. "Come in," she said to the young woman. "The house is ready. The village will feed you for 1 week. After that, you must decide." The young woman started to cry. Elena put an arm around her shoulders and led her inside, and she felt the weight of Maria's hand, long ago, on her own back, and somewhere, very faintly, the weight of André's hand on Maria's. And so on, backward, a long line of strangers turning grief into welcome, one held hand at a time. Elena stayed for 11 more years after that. She guided 7 more people through the gate. She buried 2 of them, the ones whose grief was older than their bodies could carry. She saw 5 others walk back to the bridge when they were ready, and she cried every time, and she waved until they were out of sight. On a morning in late April, she woke up and knew it was her day. She did not pack a suitcase. There was nothing in the cottage that belonged to the woman she had been. She took one thing only, André's journal, wrapped in a cloth, and she left the key on the table for whoever the village would call next. She walked to the bridge. The panic did not come. The watching, from the forest, felt almost like a blessing, almost like a goodbye. At the bridge she stopped and turned and looked back at Valsol for a long time, the white stone houses, the apple trees, the graveyard with its leaning crosses, and she whispered, "Thank you." The small brown bird sat on the bridge rail. It watched her with its impossibly intelligent eyes. Then it flew up into the pines and was gone. She walked out. She was 61 years old, or she was 94, or she was some age that didn't have a number. Her sister had died the year before. Elena had known somehow, had felt it, and had sat in the garden and wept for a whole afternoon. There was nobody waiting for her. She took a train. She took another train. She rented a small apartment in a town by the sea, because she had always wanted to live by the sea and Daniel had always wanted to live in the mountains, and they had compromised, for 16 years. On the city. She lived 18 months by the sea. She wrote a book. She called it The Village That Waits, and she published it under a name that was not her own, and she put André's journal in a locked box in the closet for whoever might find it after her. She made one friend, a woman named Irina who walked the beach every morning, and they had coffee together on Sundays and talked about nothing important, and it was enough. She died on a Tuesday in October, painlessly, in her sleep. The neighbors found her because Irina had called and she hadn't answered. On her nightstand was a photograph of Daniel and a small dried sprig of yarrow and a note that said only, in her careful handwriting, "Grief is not a wound that closes. It is a room you learn to live in. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you learn to open the door for someone else." So I ask you, whoever is listening, whoever has lost someone, whoever is reading this in the middle of your own long night, when your grief finally speaks to you, not as an enemy, not as an intruder, but as a strange patient visitor who has traveled a long way to find you, what will you do with what it asks you to carry? Will you run from it? Will you bury it? Or will you, one day, open the gate for someone whose pain still has no name? Because somewhere, always, there is a village waiting. And someone has to be at the gate.